The room was cold and sleek, filled with sharp lines and clean corners. It was a place where humans usually felt small in front of their alien counterparts. But today, it was the other way around. The alien diplomat, who had just arrived on Earth, sat confidently at the table. She was a tall, imposing figure with sharp features, her violet skin glowing faintly under the fluorescent lights. Her eyes were cold, almost calculating, as she sized up the human ambassador sitting across from her. Her posture was perfect, radiating authority, yet there was something unsettling in the way her eyes flicked to the door every so often, almost as if she expected something to happen. Ambassador Daniel Blackwell, a man in his early 30s, dressed in a sharp black suit, sat across from her, his posture relaxed but confident. He had dealt with many alien diplomats before, but there was something about her that was different. Her reputation preceded her. She was known for her arrogance and her belief that humans were nothing more than a primitive species, barely worthy of respect. Daniel smiled politely, extending his hand. "It's an honor to meet you, Ambassador Kylera," he said, keeping his voice neutral. She didn't take his hand. Instead, she looked at it briefly, then turned her eyes back to his face, clearly unimpressed. "I don't shake hands with lesser beings," she replied coldly. "I've come to see if this planet is worth saving." The words hit Daniel like a punch, but he kept his expression calm. He had faced much worse from aliens who saw humanity as a joke, but this diplomat was more brutal than most. Kylera leaned back in her chair, her violet skin contrasting against the black leather of her uniform. "Your kind is insignificant. Your technology, your ideas, all of it is primitive. I'm here to negotiate with you because my superiors have ordered me to. But don't mistake that for respect." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "Respect is earned, not given. If you came here to show disdain, then we'll have nothing to discuss." The alien laughed softly, a high-pitched sound that seemed to echo in the cold room. "You really believe you can stand up to us? That's charming. But irrelevant. I'm already bored with this meeting." She glanced at the door again, as though wishing she could leave. Daniel's gaze remained steady. "Then why don't you leave?" he asked, his tone a little sharper than he intended. "No one's forcing you to stay." Kylera's eyes flicked back to him, narrowing. "I could leave, yes," she said, voice smooth as silk, "but I believe I will stay a little longer. I'm curious to see how you humans handle humiliation." She leaned forward slightly, her lips curling into a smirk. "Tell me, Ambassador Blackwell, do you think you can impress me with your speeches and your so-called diplomatic tactics? Because I find your kind amusing." The air in the room grew heavier. Daniel could feel the insult hanging in the space between them, but he refused to let it show. He leaned back in his chair, studying her coldly. "Well, Ambassador Kylera," he said, his voice smooth and steady. "I guess we'll see if you're still laughing when you leave here. You might be surprised by what we can do. Humans have a way of showing strength when no one expects it." For a moment, the room was quiet. Kylera's eyes narrowed as she stared at him, trying to read his expression. For the first time, Daniel saw a flicker of something other than arrogance in her eyes, a hint of curiosity. "I don't expect anything from you," Kylera said, her voice quieter now, though still dripping with disdain. "But I am interested to see if you can live up to your words." Without another word, she stood up, ready to leave. Her tall, commanding figure turned toward the door, but before she could take a step, Daniel spoke again. "One last thing," he said. Kylera paused, her back to him, her fingers lightly resting on the door handle. "What is it, human?" Daniel took a slow breath, then said, "You might be the strongest of your kind, but that doesn't mean you're always in control. Just remember, the human spirit can't be crushed by arrogance or prejudice." There was silence in the room for a few seconds before Kylera turned back to face him. Her violet eyes studied him, and for the first time, she didn't seem as sure of herself. "You're an interesting human," she said, her voice lower, softer. "Let's see if your spirit really can stand against mine." With a final glance, she turned and exited the room, leaving Daniel standing there, both surprised and intrigued by what had just transpired. As the door clicked shut behind her, Daniel's heart raced, and he couldn't help but smile. This was far from over. He had just made an impression, and Kylera had taken notice. The door clicked shut behind Kylera, leaving the room silent, but it was a silence that held a strange weight. Ambassador Daniel Blackwell remained seated, his mind racing. He had dealt with many diplomats, alien and human, but none had sparked this kind of reaction from him. For the first time, he was questioning what he had just done. Was he too bold? Too confident? Or had he struck a nerve with her? The hum of the overhead lights was the only sound in the room as Daniel tried to collect his thoughts. He had known Kylera's reputation. She was cold, unapproachable, and above all, dismissive of humanity. But there was something in her reaction, that brief flicker of curiosity, that told him she wasn't as certain as she wanted to appear. As he sat there, lost in thought, the door swung open again. This time, Kylera didn't stand with the same air of superiority. She stepped back in with a quiet resolve, her posture a little more guarded than before. She didn't speak immediately, but her eyes locked onto Daniel with an intensity that sent a jolt through him. "You've underestimated me, haven't you, human?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost questioning. Daniel raised an eyebrow, his calm demeanor still intact. "I think it's you who underestimated us," he replied coolly, his eyes never leaving hers. Kylera let out a sharp breath, the frustration evident in the subtle twitch of her jaw. She walked toward the table slowly, her boots clicking on the polished floor. As she drew closer, the air seemed to shift, heavier, charged with something Daniel couldn't quite place. "Let me make one thing clear," Kylera said, stopping a few feet away from him. "I don't like being disrespected. You may think your words are clever, but they mean nothing to me." Her violet eyes glinted with an emotion that Daniel hadn't seen before. Anger? Perhaps. But there was also something else, something more human. "I didn't mean to disrespect you," Daniel replied. "But I'm not going to bow down either. Respect is earned." Kylera's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't a warm one. It was more like a challenge, like she was daring him to do something. She leaned in slightly, close enough for Daniel to catch the faint scent of her, a mix of something floral and sharp, almost metallic. "You think I care about respect?" she asked, her tone low. "I've been to countless worlds. Ruled countless systems. And none of them had the nerve to question me." Daniel didn't back down, keeping his posture relaxed. "Maybe that's your problem. You've been ruling for so long, you forgot what it's like to be challenged." There was a pause, and for a moment, Kylera's gaze flickered with something deeper, an unreadable emotion that seemed to mix surprise with irritation. Then, without warning, she moved to sit down across from him. But instead of sitting straight in her chair, she shifted, the back of her chair creaking under her weight. The movement was subtle, but it felt deliberate, almost like she was testing him. The tension between them was thick. For a few moments, neither spoke. Kylera's eyes never left Daniel's face as she sat back, her posture relaxed but with an air of superiority that was hard to ignore. "You think humans are stronger than we give you credit for," she said finally, her voice softer now, almost thoughtful. "But you are so fragile, so easily broken." Daniel chuckled, leaning forward slightly, his hands resting on the table in front of him. "You'd be surprised, Kylera. Humans don't break easily." Kylera tilted her head, studying him. The silence stretched again, longer this time, as if both of them were feeling the weight of their words. Then, in a surprising move, she slid her chair forward just a little, closer to him. It was subtle, but there was no mistaking it. "You really do think you're something special, don't you?" she asked, her voice still soft but with an edge. "You think you've got the answers, that you're going to change the galaxy with your little speeches?" Daniel didn't flinch. He wasn't sure where this was going, but he wasn't about to back down now. "I don't need speeches. I just need you to understand one thing, we're not going to roll over. Not now. Not ever." Kylera leaned in slightly, her lips curving into a more genuine smile, though it was still laced with disdain. I'd like to see you try, human. Then, without warning, she leaned even closer, and for a moment, their faces were inches apart. Daniel could feel the heat of her breath on his skin. She was daring him. Daring him to do something. But what? He wasn't sure. All he knew was that the air between them was charged now, filled with unspoken words, tension, and something more. Kylira's eyes flicked to his lips for a brief second before meeting his gaze again. You know. I'm starting to wonder if you're right about one thing. Her voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. Maybe you do have some strength. But don't think for a second it's enough. The words hit him harder than he expected. But before he could respond, Kylira stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She turned to walk away, but not without one final glance over her shoulder. This meeting isn't over yet, human, she said, her voice cold again, as if nothing had changed. I'll be back. And with that, she left, leaving Daniel alone in the room, his heart still pounding, his thoughts racing. What had just happened? The words hung in the air like a challenge, an invitation, and Daniel had no intention of backing down. The game had just begun. The door closed softly behind Kylira, but the heavy silence that followed lingered in the room like an electric current. Daniel Blackwell remained seated, his hands clasped in front of him, still absorbing the intensity of the moment. He wasn't sure if he had just walked into something much bigger than he expected or if Kylira had unknowingly just played into his hands. A smile tugged at the corner of his lips as he leaned back in his chair, watching the door for any sign of her return. He had expected arrogance, but there was something else in her eyes, something almost human. Was she testing him? Or was this more about power than diplomacy? Before he could sort through the flurry of thoughts racing in his mind, the door opened again, and Kylira re-entered the room, her posture stiff but her steps hesitant, almost measured. She didn't sit this time, though. Instead, she stopped at the center of the room, facing him with her arms crossed, her violet eyes sharp and unreadable. You've made your point, human, she said, her voice low, controlled. But now it's my turn. Daniel looked at her, tilting his head slightly. I'm listening. Her eyes narrowed, scanning him with a look that said more than words ever could. There was no doubt about it now, Kylira was testing him. And she wasn't about to let him off easy. You believe that humans have some sort of hidden strength. That you can face us and stand your ground, she said, each word dripping with challenge. But what if I told you that your strength is nothing more than an illusion? Daniel stood up slowly, his body tense, prepared for whatever she was about to throw his way. I'm still waiting to see proof of that. Kylira took a step closer, the air between them thickening with every inch. She wasn't just physically close now, she was invading his space, testing the waters, seeing how far she could push him. Proof? It's simple. You'll never understand the true nature of strength until you see it firsthand. There was a glint in her eyes, something calculating, dangerous. Daniel's instincts kicked in, but he refused to show any sign of weakness. He met her gaze, his voice steady. Then show me. I've been waiting for you to demonstrate what makes you so superior. A flicker of something crossed her face, surprise, perhaps. It was brief, but it was there. Kylira had underestimated him again. She stepped back, her stance becoming more relaxed, though her presence still felt as sharp as ever. You want to see true strength, human, she asked, a challenge in her voice. Very well. Let's see if your pride can handle what's coming. Daniel stood still, not sure what exactly was happening but sensing the shift in the air. There was no more casual conversation now. This wasn't a diplomatic discussion. This was a confrontation. Kylira's voice lowered, becoming more intimate, almost teasing. You thought your words would be enough to win me over. But here's the truth. You're a pawn in this game. And I'm the one who holds the pieces. Daniel didn't flinch. You think you're in control, he shot back, his tone sharp and defiant. Maybe you're just too blind to see that your game is already over. You came here thinking we were beneath you, but you didn't count on one thing. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite herself. And what's that, human? That I'm not afraid to lose. For a moment, Kyleera's expression faltered, her usual poise slipping just slightly. The human in front of her wasn't backing down. He wasn't like the others she had faced. There was a fire in his eyes that wasn't there before. Something had changed in the dynamic between them, something neither could ignore. She narrowed her eyes again, but this time, there was no arrogance in her gaze. Instead, it was a sharp, calculating focus. You're brave, she admitted, the words coming out almost as a concession. But that doesn't change the fact that you're still a mere human, standing in front of something far greater than yourself. Daniel took a step forward, the distance between them closing just a little. He wasn't intimidated, but there was something more in his voice now, something that came from the core of his being. You're right. I am human. And that's why I'm not going to let you walk all over us. If you think you've won because you're stronger, then maybe you haven't seen what we're capable of when we push back. For the first time, Kyleera looked at him with something resembling respect. Her icy demeanor didn't fully soften, but it wasn't as cold as it had been. You talk a lot, human. Maybe you have the spirit after all. Daniel smiled slightly, his voice lowering to a near whisper. You haven't seen anything yet. And with that, the tension between them shifted once more. Kyleera didn't say another word, but the look in her eyes, something between curiosity and grudging acknowledgement, said more than anything she could have spoken aloud. It was the beginning of something more, something deeper than either of them had anticipated. The game had truly begun. The air in the room felt charged, as though the very walls were holding their breath. Kyleera stood across from Daniel, her violet eyes flickering with a mixture of confusion and something else, something she wasn't prepared to feel. Her posture was rigid, but her hands trembled ever so slightly, a sign she was beginning to doubt herself. Daniel had done something no one else had dared. He had challenged her, spoken to her as though she wasn't the superior one in this room. That thought, strangely, unsettlingly, stuck in her mind like a splinter. And for the first time, Kyleera found herself reconsidering everything she had believed about humans. She looked at him now, not with the disdain she'd felt earlier, but with something more, something resembling curiosity. Why do you think your kind can face us? She asked, her voice softer, though still edged with a trace of skepticism. You're no match for us in strength, speed, or intellect. Your technology is primitive, your civilization still so young. Daniel didn't back down. He had expected this question. He had heard it 1,000 times from alien leaders who thought they knew it all. His reply was calm, even casual. You may be stronger in some ways, sure. But we don't rely on brute force or intelligence alone. We have something else, something you can't measure or control. Kyleera's expression faltered for a moment. She leaned slightly forward, intrigued despite herself. And what exactly is that? It's our resilience, Daniel said simply. It's the will to never back down, no matter how many times we're pushed to the edge. It's the human spirit. Her gaze flickered briefly to the side, as though the words had struck a chord. Kyleera was a seasoned diplomat, a strategist, and someone who had never been forced to think this way. Her entire existence had been built on power, domination, and fear. But here was a human, a mere ambassador, challenging her worldview in a way she hadn't expected. She took a breath, standing tall once more. Your words mean nothing. The galaxy doesn't care for spirit. It respects power. And you're nothing more than a flicker in the dark. Daniel smiled, but there was no arrogance in it, only a quiet confidence. And you're starting to realize that flickers can light up the world. There was a pause. Kyleera's lips twitched, her mind wrestling with what Daniel had said. She could feel something inside her stirring, an emotion she hadn't expected. It was a mix of frustration and admiration. The human in front of her wasn't like the others. He didn't fear her. He didn't bow to her power. And that was something she wasn't prepared for. Are you truly so blind, human? She asked, though her voice was quieter now. I've seen your kind fail. Time and time again. You are nothing in the grand scheme of things. The galaxy will devour you as easily as it has swallowed thousands of other weak species. Daniel's eyes locked onto hers, unblinking. You might be right. We might be small in the vastness of the universe. But the thing you don't get, the thing none of you understand, is that we are capable of the unimaginable when we push ourselves. We'll fight, we'll adapt, and we'll survive. And that is why you'll never truly control us. Kylera took a step back, her eyes narrowing as she processed his words. She had always believed that power was the key to everything, that control, strength, and fear were the ultimate tools. But something in Daniel's eyes told her that she had overlooked something. Something primal. Do you think your spirit is enough to stop us? She asked, almost mocking, yet there was an edge of uncertainty in her voice. I don't need to stop you, Daniel replied calmly. I just need you to understand that we're not going anywhere. Kylera stared at him, her thoughts swirling in a mixture of confusion and reluctant respect. The human had said something that had begun to chip away at the certainty she had held for centuries. She was beginning to wonder if there was more to this human spirit than she had given it credit for. The silence between them stretched long, both of them locked in a mental duel. And in that moment, Kylera realized that she might have underestimated more than just his kind. Something had shifted. Something had changed. The game was no longer just about power and control. It was about understanding the one thing she had never truly understood, the depth of human resilience. For the first time in her life, Kylera felt uncertain. The silence that followed lingered like an unspoken promise. Kylera stood there, her posture rigid, yet something had undeniably shifted in her. Her usual air of superiority felt like it was slowly slipping away, piece by piece, with every word Daniel spoke. For the first time, she wasn't in control. The realization hit her like a cold wave, and though she would never admit it aloud, it unsettled her. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed calm. The human spirit he had spoken of, the resilience, had shown through in ways Kylera couldn't ignore. He wasn't backing down, not even when she had tried to provoke him. And that was the part that kept echoing in her mind, the calmness, the certainty, the undeniable confidence. As she turned her head slightly, her violet eyes fixed on him, watching, waiting for him to make the next move. And he did. Daniel wasn't just talking about resilience anymore, he was showing it. She had always believed power came from strength or intellect, but Daniel seemed to suggest something far more elusive, something intangible but potent. You're right, Kylera finally said, her voice much softer than before, almost reluctant. Humans, they do have a certain persistence. The words were strange on her tongue. She hadn't planned on saying them, hadn't expected the quiet respect that now colored her thoughts about him. She had seen humanity as weak, ignorant, and disposable. But now, something about their spirit, about his calm and defiant attitude, was beginning to change her mind. Daniel's gaze remained steady, his expression unreadable. It's not persistence, Kylera. It's something deeper. It's about fighting for what you believe in, no matter the odds. You may not see it now, but you'll understand soon enough. Her eyes narrowed as she processed his words. She had underestimated humanity for so long, but now, she could feel it, the subtle shift in power. Not physical power, not technological power, but something that made her question her own certainty. A part of her was beginning to understand what Daniel had meant by spirit. Still, she wasn't about to show weakness. Not yet. You think you can beat us with words, human? She asked, her voice regaining some of its edge. You think that's enough to make a difference in the grand scale of the universe? Daniel's lips quirked into a small smile, his voice calm but unwavering. No, I don't think words are enough. But I think they're the first step. You underestimate the power of belief. You've been conquering worlds for centuries, but you've never had to face something like this. Not a species that can rise when pushed to the edge. The confidence in his words was enough to make Kylera's chest tighten. She was beginning to see the complexity of the human spirit, but she wasn't ready to admit it yet. She had ruled countless systems, dominated countless species, and here she was, standing in front of a human, someone she had written off as weak, who was now making her question everything. "I'm not so easily swayed," Kylera said, her voice harder now, trying to regain control. "You still have no idea what you're up against." Daniel didn't flinch. "And neither do you." Her gaze flickered with something almost human, a spark of vulnerability buried beneath her armor. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. She had been trained for this, trained to remain in control at all times. And yet, with every word Daniel spoke, she could feel her grip on that control slipping, just a little. "Let's see how long that resolve holds up when your world is on the line," Kylera said coldly, though it lacked the usual bite. Daniel stepped forward slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "You've already lost, Kylera." Her breath caught in her throat, a brief moment of doubt flashing across her face. The human wasn't just speaking out of arrogance or defiance. He believed it. And that was something Kylera had never fully understood until now, the power of belief. It was what made humans dangerous. They weren't swayed by might, and they didn't submit easily. Their strength was quiet but unshakable, like a current beneath the surface. "I don't lose," she finally said, though the words lacked their usual certainty. Daniel didn't answer at first. Instead, he simply stood there, eyes locked on hers, as if daring her to challenge him. The power had shifted. Not in a physical way, not in terms of strength or technology, but in something far more subtle. Something Kylera couldn't easily conquer. As the tension between them continued to grow, Kylera felt the walls around her carefully constructed defenses begin to crack. She wasn't sure why this human was having such an effect on her, but she knew one thing for certain: he was unlike anyone she had ever faced. And that, in itself, was enough to make her rethink everything she thought she knew about power. The balance had tipped, and for the first time, Kylera wasn't sure which way it was going to fall. The room was thick with unspoken words, the weight of their exchange hanging heavy between them. Kylera stood in front of Daniel, her posture rigid, but her eyes, those violet eyes, betrayed something different. There was a flicker of something new, something unfamiliar, and it was unsettling her in ways she couldn't explain. She had always controlled every situation, every interaction. But now, with this human, that control was slipping. Daniel, still standing a few feet away, didn't move. He didn't fidget. His expression remained calm, but there was a subtle confidence about him that seemed to radiate from the very core of his being. He was no longer just the human diplomat who had spoken out of turn. He was a force, and Kylera could feel it. "You still don't get it, do you?" Kylera said, her voice low but laced with a hint of something almost teasing. "You think you've earned my respect just by challenging me? You think your little human spirit will be enough?" Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied her with that same steady gaze, as if he could see right through her. "Respect has nothing to do with it," he said finally, his tone softer, almost amused. "You're not here for respect, Kylera. You're here because you want to understand what makes humans different. And you're starting to realize that we're not what you thought." She narrowed her eyes, feeling the challenge in his words. "You think I need your understanding?" she scoffed. "You really are a fool, human." The insult, as sharp as it was, didn't seem to faze him. Instead, Daniel took a slow step forward, closing the distance between them. His eyes never left hers, and for a moment, Kylera could feel a shift in the air, like something was building, something she couldn't quite place. "What if I told you," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper, "that you're starting to like what you're seeing? That you're not just curious about us, you're intrigued?" Kylera felt her breath catch, her chest tightening ever so slightly. The audacity of his words was matched only by the confidence with which he said them. She had been trained to handle these situations, to dismiss and control with ease. But with Daniel? It was different. Her usual response, the sharp rebuff, the quick dismissal, wasn't coming. Instead, she found herself standing still, caught in his gaze, a strange unease spreading through her. She had been used to commanding the room, to having others bend to her will. But now? Now, she was the one who felt the pressure. And for a moment, Kylera hated it. "Is that so?" she asked, her voice lowering, the teasing tone now edged with something else. "Something more intimate. You think I'm intrigued by a mere human?" Daniel smiled, a slow, almost knowing smile, as though he could read every flicker of doubt and curiosity that flashed across her face. "I think you're more than intrigued. I think you're starting to realize that there's more to us than you gave credit for. You might even become attracted to it." At that, Kylera's eyes widened, just the slightest, before her walls slammed back into place. She quickly composed herself, but her voice, when it came, had lost a little of its edge. "You're foolish to think that I would ever be attracted to someone like you. I am far above you, human." Her words were harsh, but Daniel wasn't deterred. He took another step closer, his presence almost magnetic. "I think that's the problem," he said, his voice low, almost teasing. "You've always been above everyone else, haven't you? And now, you're not so sure. You don't know what to make of someone who doesn't bow to you, who doesn't see you as some untouchable force." Kylera's heart skipped a beat, and she cursed herself for it. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to be the one feeling unsure. But the human, Daniel, was making her question everything. His words cut deeper than she wanted to admit, and the closer he got, the more difficult it became to keep her composure. "You're not as strong as you think you are," Daniel continued, his voice growing even softer, almost seductive. "You think your power, your strength, is enough to dominate us. But it's not. And I think that scares you." She opened her mouth to speak, to rebuff him, to remind him of his place, but the words didn't come. For the first time, she was at a loss for what to say. The human had turned her world upside down in ways she wasn't prepared for. And somehow, in that moment, she felt the control slipping even further from her grasp. Daniel's eyes never wavered, his expression more certain than ever. "You think you're untouchable," he said quietly, "but you're not. Not anymore. You're just like us. You can fall, too." The silence between them stretched, taut with tension. And in that moment, Kylera realized something that shocked her to her core: she didn't hate this human. She didn't even want to crush him underfoot. For the first time, she felt drawn to him. To the challenge, to the power he wielded without even trying. Kylera took a slow, measured step back, trying to regain her composure. "This isn't over," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You'll regret underestimating me, human." But Daniel wasn't intimidated. He just smiled, that quiet, confident smile that made her blood race. "Maybe," he said. "But I'm not so sure I'll regret it." With that, the moment between them shattered, and Kylera turned, leaving the room as quickly as she could without showing weakness. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had changed. The human wasn't just another diplomat. He was something far more dangerous. And for the first time in centuries, Kylera found herself wondering if she had underestimated not just humanity, but him, in particular. The door clicked shut softly behind Kylera as she stepped out of the room, her mind swirling with thoughts she hadn't expected to have. The human diplomat, Daniel, had done something none of her kind had ever done. He had disrupted her certainty, made her question everything she thought she knew about power, control, and even herself. For a moment, she stood in the corridor, her back against the cool walls, struggling to regain the composure she had worked so hard to perfect. Her thoughts were interrupted by the faint sound of footsteps approaching. Kylera tensed, but when she turned, it was Daniel, calm, unbothered, and far too confident for her liking. "Still following me, human?" she asked, her voice betraying none of the uncertainty she felt. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a few steps closer, his gaze never leaving hers. The confident smirk he wore was gone, replaced with something sharper, more determined. There was a fire in his eyes that she couldn't ignore, something that seemed to draw her in despite her attempts to maintain her distance. "I'm not following you," Daniel replied smoothly, his voice steady and calm. "I'm showing you that there's more at play here than just strength or intellect." It's about something you can't control. Kylera narrowed her eyes, the familiar arrogance creeping back into her stance. And what exactly do you think you're showing me? Daniel paused, his gaze intense. I'm showing you that the power you think you have over humans doesn't mean anything. Not when you're up against something more resilient. Something that doesn't bow to your control. She clenched her jaw, feeling the familiar sting of defiance from him. The human had a way of making her feel small, and it unsettled her in a way she hadn't felt in ages. But there was more to this moment than she cared to admit. You think you've won? She asked, her voice low, a hint of disbelief creeping in. You think your resilience is enough to overcome centuries of dominance? Daniel's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. I don't need to win, Kylera. I'm not playing your game. But you are. And that's where you've made your mistake. You think you can control everything, but you can't control us. And that's why you're here. You're starting to see that now. Kylera's pulse quickened, but she refused to show it. She stood tall, trying to maintain the power she had always relied on. You're just a human. A weak, insignificant creature, and you're standing here, lecturing me about control, she said, trying to mask the unease in her voice. I could destroy your planet with a flick of my wrist. Daniel's eyes flickered with something almost playful, but his voice remained unwavering. You can try. But the one thing you can't destroy is hope. And that's what we have. Hope. The will to rise when everything's against us. That's what makes us different. And that's why you're starting to feel this. You're scared. Her chest tightened, and for a fleeting moment, she felt something stir in her, something she couldn't quite identify. Was it fear? Was it respect? Or was it something else, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in centuries? I'm not scared of you, Kylera said, her voice suddenly more strained, her resolve cracking. I'm scared of nothing. Daniel took a step closer, his voice a whisper now, but laced with undeniable power. You should be. You're standing on the edge of something you can't control, something you've never encountered before. And that is what scares you. Kylera stood still, her mind racing as she processed his words. There was something in his gaze, something far more potent than just words. For the first time, Kylera felt a flicker of uncertainty that she couldn't shake. The human before her had gotten under her skin, in a way no one had before. He wasn't just challenging her. He was forcing her to confront a reality she wasn't ready for. Before she could gather her thoughts, Daniel spoke again, his voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. You came here thinking you could conquer us. But you've underestimated us. And it's not because you're weak, it's because you don't understand us. You don't understand what it means to fight for something you believe in. Kylera's breath caught in her throat. Was this what she had been missing all along? The human spirit? The thing that made them push forward, even in the face of certain defeat? For the first time, Kylera found herself questioning everything she had ever known about power. Was it truly just about strength and control? Or was there something else, something more elusive, that could change the balance of everything? I've spent my life conquering, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes fixed on him, as if searching for something. But you're right. There's something different about you. About humans. Daniel's gaze softened, and for the briefest moment, the tension between them seemed to lift. You're starting to see it, Kylera. It's not about power. It's about perseverance. It's about rising when everything tells you to fall. She took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. The walls she had spent her entire life building, walls of control, of dominance, were crumbling. And for the first time in centuries, she was beginning to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. You're not like the others, Kylera admitted quietly, her voice tinged with something unfamiliar. And that scares me. Daniel smiled, a small, knowing smile. Good. It should. Kylera didn't respond. She turned away, her mind racing, but this time, there was no certainty. No power. Just a deep, unsettling realization. She wasn't in control anymore. And she had no idea what to do about it.